Okay, hello everyone. This is our second webinar in the Weed Inspector and Land Manager webinar series. Most of you probably know me, but my name is Katie Makahonyuk and I am the Plant Health Officer for SARM Division 1. I'm so happy you're here today. We're going to take a look at some weeds to watch for and common lookalikes. So let's get started. And for some reason, my thing won't go ahead. Okay, there we go. So just a little review of the Saskatchewan Weed Control Act. There's three categories of weeds that we deal with. The first one is prohibited weeds. These ones are weeds that are either not present in the province or are rare. They are the ones that we'll mostly focus on today, but these are the worst ones. So pay special attention to the prohibited weeds. The noxious weeds are weeds that are more commonly found. Some are widely distributed in Saskatchewan. And we've got more of a problem with those ones. The nuisance weeds are just that, they're a nuisance, and we don't really pay much attention to them, but they are covered under the Act. These are weeds like dandelions, that kind of thing. Okay, so prohibited weeds, like I said, they are the worst ones that we work with. Our policy on prohibited weeds is what they call a scorched earth policy. You want to, in the words of Clark Brenzel, you want to make them deader than dead. They are way cheaper to control if you do it early and completely eradicate them. So that's the goal. So let's get into some prohibited weeds to watch for in Saskatchewan. I'm not going to cover them all today, just the ones that we have seen in the province or are close to getting into Saskatchewan. Some of the other prohibited weeds are not really as much of a concern yet, so let's have a look. The first one is salt cedar. This one is kind of more of a shrub or a smaller tree. I love this picture because it shows the definition of the leaves. You can really see how they're not like a broadleaf on a tree. They're more like the cedars that you might recognize from your front yard. The leaves are kind of scaly that way. In the fall, they can turn kind of a yellow-orange color and be really bright, as you'll see on the next slide. And then the flowers are kind of white, pinkish, even dark pink sometimes. So why is it so bad? Well, it produces a large number of small seeds. This one can be bad in lower lying areas because it, like saline soil, what it does is it brings up all the salts from the soil profile and it increases the salinity around it so that other plants can't grow, which means it displaces the native vegetation around the area. So in Saskatchewan, it has been located a few times. It tends to pop up every once in a while. It's around the Findlater gravel pit, the Cadillac gravel pit, southeast of Bethune, and there is even one in the city of Regina. I'm not sure if that's been wiped out yet or not, but last I heard it was still there. Our next one is Houndstone. I've seen this one in person. It is kind of a beautiful plant, and that's what you'll find with a lot of the prohibited weeds. Lots of them have escaped from domestic plantings. They were brought over from other countries way back when the settlers were coming, and they had escaped from gardens and stuff and yard sites and stuff like that. The Houndstone is a biennial and it's taprooted. The leaves at the base of the rosette are really kind of broad and long, and that's how it got its name, is because it looks like a dog's tongue. And the flowers are a really nice, deep purplish red. The seeds are crazy sticky. They are worse than bluebird or something like that. They'll stick to anything. So that's why part of the reason why it's become such a bad one is because it'll stick to cattle, sheep, deer, birds, anything, and it spreads so quickly just because it's got so much movement. It grows really well in pasture. I've seen it in kind of in and amongst trees, which is another reason why it's so difficult to kill, is because you can't get a sprayer in there. You have to do it by hand. Also difficult to kill because the leaves are so fuzzy and hairy. The chemical can't penetrate the leaf surface. So this one is found down around Mooseman, Wapella, and in a gravel pit near Grenfell, I believe. It's been there for a little while. We're kind of trying some biocontrol measures on it right now, and other chemical control methods as well. Our next one is Fieldscapious. I've seen this one in person as well, and I had to fight the urge to bring some home for my garden because it's a beautiful one as well. It is a taprooted perennial, reproduces mostly by seed. I wonder if I can get I thought I'd be able to have a pointer. Anyway, on the more right side of the picture, you can see the dome of the seed head. All those little seeds in there kind of shatter very easily, and there can be around 2,000 seeds per plant. This one was actually brought to Canada. It's a wildflower in Europe, so likely escaped from somebody's garden. It can be very invasive. It chokes out the desirable vegetation. It's quite popular in higher organic matter areas. It chokes out hay, that kind of thing. And it hasn't got very much for feed value to it either. So this one is found up around Birch Hills. Was found in the White Beach community pasture years ago, but I believe that population was eradicated. And it's currently found south of Yorkton also. Our next one is Flowering Rush. This one is more of an aquatic plant. It's a perennial. It has got these little vegetative bulblets, and they kind of split off and float down the water system and establish elsewhere. And seeds as well. The seeds move quite easily. These ones can be quite tall, and the flowers are mostly pinkish, can be white, can be a really dark pink. So this one, obviously, it's in wetlands, so it chokes out the vegetation there and destroys habitat for wetland species like ducks and frogs and that kind of thing. The seeds can live for a long time. The problem with controlling this one is because it is difficult to control because of its location. It's near water, so you can't really use many herbicides very safely. It's also hard to get there, so it can tend to take over quite easily. This one has been found west of Watrous and along the South Saskatchewan River, kind of northeast and northwest of Leader, and also around the potash mine by Esterhazy and Gerald. I'm not sure if that one is under control or not. I've heard that it might be, but I'm not sure. Our next one is spotted knapweed. I haven't had much experience with the knapweeds myself, but I know that in some areas of the province it can be quite bad. This one is a taprooted perennial. The structure of the plant is often, it reminds me of like a tumbleweed or even a mature kochia plant. It's got that kind of rounded, full shape. This one is easy to identify just because it's got these these egg-shaped buds, and the bracts have these dark tips, and it makes it look kind of spotted. So that's, I guess, where they got spotted knapweed from. So this one's bad just because of seed production. 140 seeds per square meter is a lot. It can spread easily just because the seeds are so light and they can be moved by air or attach onto animals, that kind of thing. Spotted knapweed is allelopathic. So if anyone doesn't know what that is, that's the process of a plant emitting chemicals to kill out plants that surround it. So it wipes out its neighbors and takes over that land that the other plants are occupying. So that's kind of how it spreads. It really chokes out a lot of the other vegetation, and it hasn't got a great root system. So anywhere that it takes over, it can increase the soil erosion. So there's nothing holding the soil in place. So if you get heavy rains or anything, it can easily be washed away. If you are touching it, it can cause skin irritation as well. And this one is located more in the south, especially southwest Saskatchewan, near Alberta and the US border, especially along the US border. Diffuse knapweed is very similar, but it just has a different appearance. Yeah. The leaves are a lot more finely divided than spotted knapweed, and these flowers are mostly white. I've heard that they can be pink as well, but mostly that whitish color. And these buds, rather than having the spots like spotted knapweed, these ones have rigid spines underneath the flowers. So, I mean, you wouldn't want to be touching it, or it can cause problems for livestock. If it's in hay or something like that, it can hurt cattle. So yeah, this one can also produce a fair amount of seeds and is allelopathic, just like spotted knapweed. Very, very similar characteristics. And this one is found kind of a little further north than the spotted knapweed is. But I mean, both weeds can be found pretty well anywhere in the province. It's just where they are right now is tending to be further south. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the potential new additions or weeds that we really need to be looking out for. Yeah, these are interesting ones. So the first one that really needs to be talked about is tall waterhemp and Palmer amaranth. They're both related to red root pigweed. They're members of the pigweed family. So there's quite a few weeds that are in that family, but these ones have shown to be really, really bad for agriculture. They're annuals and they all spread through a lot of seed, anywhere from 250,000 to over 1 million seeds per plant in good conditions. These ones compete with crops. So if you have a wheat crop, they will grow taller than the wheat crop. If you have a corn crop that's 6, 7, 8 feet tall, these will grow taller than the corn. They're always noticeable that way because they're always getting taller than whatever crop they're planted or they're growing in. This one is very common in the States. It's been found recently in Manitoba. So the populations that were in Manitoba went from them finding 1 or 2 plants in a field to thousands just within a year or 2 or 3. They when you produce that many seeds, it can be really, it can get bad really fast. So that's something that they've really worked in Manitoba. They've pulled a lot of weeds out by hand because yeah, it's they're bad for herbicide resistance as well. I think it's up to 7 or 8 modes of action they're showing resistance to in the States now. So something we don't want here, that's for sure. Orange hawkweed is our next one. This one is a perennial broadleaf. It's definitely not as scary as the water hemp, but it's still one that we need to have a look for. This one is very hairy. It's got a milky sap and the flowers are a bright orange color. You don't often see orange colored flowers around, so this one is fairly distinctive. It spreads by above ground stolons, which is kind of unique, and also creeping roots and airborne seeds. And this one can create really dense mats that can crowd out all the other plants around it. And I've heard that this one was found near moose jaw as well. Our next one is Phragmites Australis. This one is common reed. This one is a little different because we have a native common reed that is found throughout Western Canada, but this one is like the native stuff on steroids. It's it's very aggressive, and you can see by the picture on the left, you can see how tall it can get. The photo on the right is just illustrating the difference between native reed and Phragmites. You can see the one on the top is kind of normal sized, and the one underneath it is fairly giant. So this one is really bad for any wetlands. It's been found a lot near the Great Lakes in Ontario. Really extensive measures have been taken to try and control it, but it just keeps spreading and spreading and spreading. This one is also allelopathic, so it chokes out other vegetation around it and makes such a dense stand that waterfowl, anything in that environment really struggles to live, just because it's such a thick canopy. Also, fire risk really increases, because if you get a thick canopy of anything like this, it really really creates a fire hazard and can take out a lot of habitat. So we've been on the lookout for this one in Saskatchewan. There have been no confirmed cases of it yet, but there is a possible case in Manitoba by Lake Winnipeg. Yeah, keep an eye out for it. You, as weed inspectors, you may not really have many opportunities to look for it. It might not be on the top of your radar, but just as you're driving around, just have a look. If you see anything that looks out of the ordinary, remember that weed inspectors are able to get weed diagnosis free by the Saskatchewan Crop Protection Lab. So your PHO can help you do that if you need to. Our next one is not as severe as the other ones. This one is actually being considered for the noxious weed list, perhaps not the prohibited weed list, but we do have it around the province. This one has got really nice blue flowers. It's hairy and it's got really prickly stems. It's really hard to handle by hand, and it can be toxic to horses and cattle. It tends to invade pasture and rangeland as well. I know that it's in southern Saskatchewan, and I've heard that it's in Manitoba also. The last one, I just put this one in here just before the presentation started, actually. It popped into my head. Himalayan balsam is something that's been popping up around the province that many people don't know about. It's an interesting weed. It's an annual, which is different from most of the other weeds that we deal with. It spreads through seed. These seeds will, sorry, I'll back that up. This plant is related to spotted touch-me-not. So if anyone remembers going out as a kid and touching these little seed pods, they would explode. That's exactly what this weed does. You touch the pod and the weed, or the seeds can go as far as, I think, 5 feet from the plant, from the original plant. So that's pretty interesting, because it's a good way for it to spread around. But this one, because it produces so many seeds, it creates a dense mat of vegetation and it outcompetes all the other plants around it. So because it's got a fibrous root system and really shallow, if you get a dense stand, especially along a riverbank or something like that, it can create a lot of erosion because there's nothing, those roots aren't holding anything in place. So Definitely originates from ornamental plantings. The pictures here on the presentation, I actually found in my parents' yard last summer. I was looking around and something caught my eye and I went and had a look at it, and sure enough, it was Himalayan balsam. And I told my mom, you guys know that this is an invasive weed, right? And my dad was actually quite mad at me for telling him to pull all the plants because he really liked them. But since then, they don't have any more in the yard. But they got it from a neighbor who actually had it in their garden as well. So you might have some people mad at you, but it'll be worth it in the end to tell them to get rid of this plant. So that's about all the weeds I was going to focus on today. The one thing that I wanted to really talk about was the resources that are available. And I know some of you have been on this website, but I thought it might be worth it just to have a look and show you kind of what's available. And I hope that it brings it up, but you'll have to bear with me. This is my first time trying this, so there we go. Okay, so if you don't copy the link, all you have to do is go onto Google and just type weed inspectors in Saskatchewan, and this will be the first one that it brings up. It's got the most recent copy of the Saskatchewan Weed Control Act. It goes over just a brief description of the role of a weed inspector, kind of talking more about early detection and eradication of different weeds, and where you need to send your designation or your appointment as weed inspector. And then it's got links to all the forms you might need in your role. So it's got the weed control regulations, the list of prohibited, noxious, and nuisance weeds, as well as your agreement forms, your order forms, a map of current weed inspector appointments, just any little tools that weed inspectors might need. This is a really handy spot to get all of that. So if I can get back to my presentation, yeah. Okay, so one thing I forgot to mention at the very beginning of this was that we do have a survey that pops up at the end of the webinar after you exit the webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you would take the time and fill it out. It really helps us understand what you liked about the webinars, what you didn't like about them, what you'd be looking for in the future. And just it's always good for us to get that feedback so that we can serve you a little better going forward. So with that, I am going to let Joanne take over, and she's going to talk about a few weed lookalikes and how to tell the difference between them. So she's going to take over.
All right, hi everyone. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Thanks, Katie. So yes, my name is Joanne Kwasniewski. I'm the Plant Health Officer for SARM Division 2, which is South Central Saskatchewan. And today I'm going to do some side-by-side comparisons of commonly confused plants. So this is something that we just thought would be a good idea because especially when you're new to plant ID, it's really helpful to see a side-by-side comparison of plants that are similar and see directly how they differ. So the first one we're going to go through are yellow toad flax and Dalmatian toad flax. So yellow toad flax is a noxious weed in Saskatchewan, so it's definitely present. Sorry about that. And so It's about 60 centimeters in height, and it has unbranched stems. And the big difference between these two plants for me is the leaves. So the leaves on yellow toad flax are very narrow and tapered on both ends. And then Dalmatian toad flax is a prohibited weed in Saskatchewan, but it is also present within the province. And it's a little bit taller than yellow toad flax, up to 90 centimeters in height. It has branched stems, and the leaves are heart-shaped, and they clasp the stem. So that's a really quick and easy way to tell them apart. They both have very similar flowers. They're snapdragon-like flowers with a long spur. Typically, yellow toad flax has a more pale yellow petal with an orange throat, and Dalmatian toad flax has bright yellow petals, but it can vary between the different plants. So usually I would say the leaves are your dead giveaway. And these two plants are also often mistaken for the toad flaxes, especially at a distance. They're all very common weeds to see in ditches, but once you get closer, you can see that they're actually quite different. So first is Birdspur Trifoil, and this is an introduced plant, and it does have some invasive qualities, so it's something to keep an eye out for. And it has yellow pea-type flowers, and it has red stripes in it. And the flowers grow in whorls with up to 6 flowers in it in the inflorescence. And the leaves are pinnate, and they have 5 little leaflets. So there's 3 leaflets at the tip of the leaf, and then a pair of them at the base. And golden bean is a native plant, and both Birdspur Trifoil and golden bean are in the pea family, so they both have pea-type flowers. You might also know golden bean as buffalo bean. That's what I grew up knowing it as. And the difference between the flowers in these ones is that in golden bean, the flowers grow in a dense raceme. So the flowers are kind of coming off of the central axis. And the leaves are trifoliate, so it's divided into 3 leaflets. So that's kind of your giveaway that it's not Birdspur Trifoil. And it's a yellow flower without the red stripe. So next we're going to go into some daisy lookalikes. We have Oxide daisy and Shasta daisy here. Oxide daisy is a noxious weed in Saskatchewan, and its stem leaves are elongated, and it has this very coarsely toothed, or even in some leaves they'll be more lobed edges. And it grows with creeping roots, so it doesn't really grow in clumps, it kind of just spreads throughout the environment. Shasta daisy is an ornamental, and some varieties, especially older varieties, can be invasive. So lots of people can buy these at greenhouses, so it's just something to be aware of and be careful of when you're shopping for your garden, is to try to avoid Shasta daisy varieties that are known to be invasive. And they can hybridize with Oxide daisy as well. So to tell the difference between them, the stem leaves on the Shasta daisy are also elongated, but the serrated edges are a little more fine, and you won't see that same lobing. And also the growth habitat of the Shasta daisy, they grow more in clumps. And in general, Shasta daisy varieties grow taller and bushier than Oxide daisy because they are an ornamental, so they're bred to do that. Our next daisy lookalikes are Scentless chamomile and pineapple weed. So Scentless chamomile is a noxious weed in Saskatchewan, and it has a yellow center of the flower, and it's rounded. So that's how you can tell Scentless chamomile from another similar plant, wild chamomile, which has a more cone-like center of the flower. And as its name indicates, it has no scent, and its flowers are smaller than Oxide daisy and Shasta daisy. Pineapple weed is another introduced species, and it's pretty easy to tell it apart from the other ones because the flowers lack the outer white ray florets, so it's just these little yellow buttons. And when you crush the foliage, it has a sweet kind of pineapple scent, hence its name. And both of these species have very finely divided leaves that look kind of feathery or fern-like, and that's a really easy way to tell it from Oxide daisy. Next, we have purple loosestrife and fireweed. Purple loosestrife is a noxious weed in Saskatchewan, and its flowers are kind of purplish pink, and it can have up to 5 to 7 petals in the flower, and they grow in spike inflorescences. So all the flowers are coming off the central axis, and they're attached directly to that central axis. And fireweed is a native plant, and it also has purplish pink flowers. The flowers only have 4 petals, however, and a deeply cleft stigma. So you can kind of see this here. It's very distinctive, and it has a raceme inflorescence. So to differentiate between the spike and the raceme, the flowers are attached to the central axis by a little stalk called a pedicel. So it's kind of more airy. That's how I would describe it, to kind of, in very simple terms, it has a more airy look to the inflorescence. Purple loosestrife leaves are kind of lance-shaped and a little more rounded than fireweed, and they have no leaf stalk, so they attach directly to the stem. The plants have several stems, and the stems have 4 edges. So if you were to roll the stem in between your finger, you would feel distinct edges. And they also commonly grow in wetlands. And so fireweed leaves are a little bit longer and thinner, and they have pale green undersides. The plants usually grow up from a single stem rather than multiple, and you're more likely to see these on the edges of woods, roadsides, or in disturbed soil. Next, we're going to get into our carrot family lookalikes. So just some common characteristics of plants in the carrot family is they all have umbel or umbrella-shaped inflorescences. They typically have hollow stems. Their leaves are arranged alternately on the stems, and they're usually pretty aromatic plants. So the first ones we're going to go over are giant hogweed and cow parsnip. And the big difference between these 2 plants is the sheer size. So giant hogweed, as the name suggests, is very big. It can grow from 4 to 6 meters, and its flower clusters can be 30 to 80 centimeters across. And its leaves can be up to 1.5 meters long. So very large. It is a prohibited weed in Saskatchewan, but it's not present in Saskatchewan to our knowledge. Cow parsnip is also a pretty big plant, but next to giant hogweed, it's dwarfed. So it's a native plant, and it's actually quite common, especially in coulees and places like that. It can grow from 1 to 2.5 meters tall, and the white flower clusters are 10 to 30 centimeters across, and the leaves can be up to 0.5 meter long. So still a very big plant, but not nearly as big as giant hogweed. The other difference between the 2 is the leaves. So in giant hogweed, the upper leaves have a more pointed lobes, and they're a little more deeply divided. And the stem has really rigid bristles and purple blotches. Cow parsnip, the leaves have a more rounded look, and they're not so deeply divided. And the leaves have a fuzzy underside. The stem also has more soft fuzzy hairs, and it's mostly green but can have a few purple spots. But both plants do contain a sap that causes severe photosensitivity, so they're both plants that you want to handle with extreme care. Another similar plant in the carrot family is poison hemlock, and this is also prohibited in Saskatchewan, and it's found in small populations in southern Saskatchewan. Similar to cow parsnip, it's 1 to 3 meters tall, and its white flower clusters are up to 7 centimeters wide. So these flower clusters are much, much smaller than what we'd see from cow parsnip or giant hogweed. And the biggest difference, I think, is the leaves. The leaves are very shiny, and they're divided into fern-like segments. So they're just very finely divided leaves and not those big palm-shaped leaves that we saw from the other ones. The stems also have purple spots but they're more ridged. And it's a highly poisonous plant. So it doesn't have that photosensitivity aspect, but any ingestion is very dangerous. Our next carrot family lookalikes are wild parsnip and heart-leaved Alexanders. So what differentiates these ones from the other carrot family is that they have yellow flower clusters. So wild parsnip is noxious in Saskatchewan, and it can grow between 30 to 150 centimeters tall, and its flower clusters can be 10 to 20 centimeters wide. Heart-leaved Alexanders are a native plant in Saskatchewan, and they're a little bit shorter. They're 30 to 60 centimeters tall, and their yellow flower clusters are 5 to 8 centimeters wide, so overall a smaller plant. The leaves are also used to differentiate them. The wild parsnip has pinnately compound leaves. That just means the leaves are arranged on either side of the leaflet stem. And the little leaflets are oblong to oval or kind of mitten shaped and 5 to 10 centimeters long. And they have these serrated leaf edges as well. Wild parsnip also contains that sap that causes severe photosensitivity. So it's another plant that you want to handle with extreme caution. Heart-leaved Alexander leaves, the stem leaves on the left have 3 ovate lobes, and the basal leaves, so the leaves at the base of the plant, are cordate shaped or heart shaped. And the leaves are 8 to 15 centimeters long, and they also have these finely serrated leaf edges. So the last few weeds I have for you today are kind of lookalikes from a distance. So we often get a few calls in the spring about just reports of leafy spurge or tansy. And especially when you're driving down the road, it's really hard to tell different weeds apart, especially when they're all kind of yellow and growing en masse. So I'm just going to kind of do a side-by-side comparison, and it's quite obvious that they're different when you look at them closer, but just a couple tips and tricks. So leafy spurge and low goldenrod. Leafy spurge is noxious in Saskatchewan, so it's very widespread. The biggest thing, especially at a distance, is leafy spurge has this very distinctive yellow-green color. So it's especially like, you can see it in this picture on the right here. It has that yellowish green color. The flower clusters are umbrella shaped as well, and the leaves are very thin and lance-shaped. And a dead giveaway, especially when you get right up close to the plant, is if you break open the stem or leaves, spurge will have this milky white sap in it. Low goldenrod, and I just picked low goldenrod because it's one of the more common goldenrods in Saskatchewan, but there's many different species. So goldenrods are native to Saskatchewan, and it has very small yellow flowers that grow in dense panicles. So a panicle is just an inflorescence that has many different branches. So you can kind of see it's branching off there. The leaves are also thin and lance-shaped, but a distinguishing characteristic is that the higher you get up on the stem, the smaller the leaves get. Next, we have common tansy and marsh ragwort. Common tansy is a noxious weed in Saskatchewan, and it grows in clumps. So that's kind of a distinctive growing habit of them. And they have somewhat woody stems as well. The most distinctive characteristic I would think for tansy is these very yellow button type flowers, and they have very dense flat topped clusters. Marsh ragwort is one that we've seen, especially in the past couple of years, just due to environmental conditions. It is a native plant, and the most distinctive thing to me, especially when you get up close, is that it has these very large, hollow, and like incredibly hairy stems. And it also has flowers similar to common tansy that grow in dense, flat-topped or slightly rounded clusters. but it is typically found on the edges of sloughs, lakes, and streams. So it does kind of like that marsh habitat. And the difference in the leaves, common tansy leaves are very deeply divided, and they kind of it gives it a fern-like kind of look. And the leaflets are very narrow with serrated or toothed edges. Marsh Ragwort, the leaves are pretty gnarly looking actually. They're lance-shaped and they have really wavy margins on the bottom. And getting closer to the top of the plant, the leaves are more lance-shaped and they have really large teeth on them. And you can see in this picture just how fuzzy and hairy that stem is. And that's the weeds I have for you today. I'm just going to leave you with a couple of resources you might be interested in. So for books, Weeds of North America is probably the one I use the most, and you can buy it online on Amazon. And Weeds of the Prairies, I don't currently see it for sale online, but it does look like online copies have been made available. So if you Google the name of this book, you can actually find the whole PDF online. There's also some online resources. The Saskatchewan Invasive Plant Species Identification Guide goes over a lot of the common invasive plants in Saskatchewan, and it's available online. And the Saskatchewan Invasive Species Council has these really great fact sheets on certain weeds, and it gives you a really in-depth look at them. And the website Saskatchewan Wildflowers has a really large and extensive database of both native and invasive plant species in Saskatchewan. And they have really good photos, really good descriptions. So if you're ever trying to figure out something, that's a really good place to look. And also just a reminder that all appointed weed inspectors get complimentary weed identification through the crop protection lab. So you can either bring it to the lab in person or send it through the mail, I believe, and they'll identify it for you and let you know what you're dealing with. And of course, you can always reach out to your plant health officer for any questions on weed identification or anything of that sort. So I guess we can get into some questions if there are any.
Perfect. Thanks, Joanne. That was awesome. I see there are a few questions here. Okay, the first one is asking about Himalayan balsam. I must not have, I think I missed a few things in my notes there from what the presentation said, but Himalayan balsam is actually not a tree. It's just a plant. It's about 4 feet tall roughly. So it's it wouldn't be in shelter belts or anything like that unless it's escaped and is growing around the trees. But it is a herbaceous plant. It's not a tree. Okay, once the flowers of purple loosestrife are done and fireweed, do we have a picture of what the seed head looks like near fall time? I wouldn't have anything. Joanne, would you have anything like that?
Not on hand here, no.
Yeah. I would think that it would look similar, like on purple loosestrife, it would be that tight sort of, it would stay along the stem really closely, much like it does when it's blooming. And the fireweed, I know the seed pods are actually like little sticks that kind of stick off of the main stem. But yeah, I wouldn't have any pictures.
Yeah, I don't have any right offhand, but yeah, like I agree. It'd just be kind of the way that the seeds are hanging on the plant. I think purple loosestrife seeds are much smaller, and then the fireweed has those more like elongated seeds.
Yeah. Is heart-leafed Alexanders that common? Yes, they are actually a lot more common than I would have thought. They are kind of everywhere, and the one way that I can easily identify them is that they're a lot shorter than wild parsnip. They're about half the height. Wild parsnip is common too. It's most people didn't really pay much attention to it until a Facebook post came out a few years ago and kind of informed people that what wild parsnip is, and now everyone's kind of concerned about it. So, but both of them are quite common around Saskatchewan. Okay, the Phragmites, he's asking if it's in marsh and wetland areas. Yeah, that's typically where it's found. It really likes water, so anywhere along not so much rivers, but more just, yeah, that marshy wetland. I've seen a lot of it around Fort Qu'Appelle down in the valley there. It's common right beside the road. Yeah, ditches, anywhere that it's really wet. My next question. If scentless chamomile is a noxious weed, why is it no longer in the IPCP program? You want to take that one, Joanne? We've had a lot of discussion about this weed lately, so that's why we're laughing. It is a good question, though.
It definitely is. So the invasive plant control program does not cover every noxious weed. It's just a directive from the ministry as to which weeds are particularly expensive to control. And from my understanding, scentless chamomile, the herbicide to control it, isn't as expensive as some other ones. But it's always something that we take feedback on. And I don't know, do you have anything else to add to that, Katie?
No, that was a really good answer. I just, Lynn Roselle just emailed me a picture of the purple loosestrife seed head. So I will take control of the screen again, just to show you what that looks like. Okay, can you see that, Joanne? Yeah, yeah, okay. So hopefully you guys can see my pointer, but that's kind of what the stem looks like after the plant has matured. So just that kind of, you can see where the seeds were and just how linear it is. It's kind of just in one tight little line along the stem. So that was very good. Thank you, Lynn. Do we have any more questions?
I don't see any more.
Oh yeah, okay. No, that's all we have for questions. So unless there are more questions, I think we can wrap it up for today. Just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. We're always happy to be doing these webinars and providing you guys with information. I hope that I mentioned off the start that there are continuing education credits, but I'm mentioning it again. For those of you that weren't able to view the webinar today, well, I guess you wouldn't need to know this, but but they will be posted on the SARM website after, and there will be a quiz just for those that have not been able to view it live. So yeah, thanks so much, Joanne. You did a great job. And our next webinar is going to be on March 23rd, and that's talking about biocontrol with a researcher from AAFC. And Joanne will be talking about the biocontrol agents in Saskatchewan. So that's a wrap for today. Thanks so much and have a great day.